We regularly make updates, as all districts do across the state, to make sure that the policies, the local policies, are current with law and all up to date. So, one of the policies that the board recently looked at is something called Board Policy 6144. And if we can go back to the first slide, Miko, sorry, it's a little bit, yeah. Um, this policy is regarding controversial issues in the classroom. And when we think about policies, there's kind of two components that work together. The first is the policy itself, and this is based on guidance that we get, that really all school boards get across the state based on the current laws, and it's giving that broad overview about the district's expectations and the what and the why of the district operations. And the policies themselves are approved by our Board of Trustees. And then once we have a new policy, staff creates what's called the administrative regulation, and it's kind of the how-to for the day-to-day operations of the policy. So it goes into more detail. It's not board approved. It's approved by something called the executive cabinet, which is our superintendent, and then all of our other executive team staff, including me. And we work together on that to make sure that staff understand how to implement the policy. So the policy 6144 that was recently adopted by the board, this was one that was set for regular updates for some time, and the board members took action to approve the new policy earlier this year. And we're now taking a look at the draft AR. Can we click on the policy itself there, Miko? I think it will.
Which draft?
The BP.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of our policies are stored in something called board docs, and you can find that on the district website. So you can see up at the top, it's telling us that it's 6144, and over in the left area where above the gray, it says board policies. So we know we're looking in the right section, and it gives you the policy there. Once we have the AR, we'll store it also in this same spot, but up where it says board policies, we can toggle to administrative regulations. We don't have one for this policy yet, but once we finish, we'll store it right there. So I wanted to let you know about this. We're not going to be digging into it too much, but I wanted to let you know where we are in the process and give you an opportunity to provide some feedback. So the policy itself here is set and adopted as is written. And the AR is the part that we're going to ask for some feedback on. So if we can go back to the AR draft in our agenda. Sometimes with our ARs, we have a feedback loop before we finalize the AR if it's something that's more complex, and that's true in this case as well. So we have worked with a team of teachers to get some input on this, and we also have worked with our principals to get some input, and we've been making revisions along the way. So this is still just a draft, it's not final. And we wanted to provide an opportunity for our PAC and DELAC parents to share some feedback. I do have a form that I'll show you where to find it, and we'll be collecting feedback through the end of this week. And then what happens is our executive cabinet takes a look at all of the feedback and makes further revisions if needed to the draft. We finalize it, and then we publish it. So I think, the part I did want to call attention to is the introduction up here. We have a strong focus on future-ready learning for our students, and we know that we want to foster our students' development as critical thinkers and collaborative, creative problem solvers who make a positive contribution in their community and the world. And we know that our teachers, they play such a vital role in making sure that the opportunities that students have in the classroom include exploring significant issues, evaluating complex situations, and engaging in meaningful discussions, and knowing that our students can express their ideas freely in the classroom. And the purpose of the AR is to provide teachers. Oh, I need you to see the top there, Miko. Thank you. To provide teachers with guidance on implementing the policy, ensuring that what happens in the classroom is aligned with the priorities. And also, it is intending to provide clarity to parents and guardians regarding classroom expectations and procedures for resolving any concerns in these areas. So, I encourage you to read through the policy and the draft AR. And I'm going to show you where the form is, where you can share your feedback if you'd like to weigh in on this. We can go back to the slides. Yeah, so the questions we've been asking our staff and we'd like to ask you is, would you like to share any feedback on what sections of this draft AR are clear, what sections are unclear or need more information, and what else do you want us to know or consider as we're finalizing the administrative regulation? So our goal is to capture the rest of the feedback this week, take a look at that at the beginning of next week, and then finalize the administrative regulation for everybody to use. So thank you for taking time to offer your feedback if you're interested in doing that. Does anybody have any kind of clarifying question about that task or where we are in the process? Okay, we can go on to the next topic. Okay, so one of the really important roles of our PAC and DELAC parents is to help us with something, excuse me, called the Local Control and Accountability Plan. And that is, it's our district improvement plan. Every year we refresh it, and every 3 years we get the full reset. And so later this spring, I'll be talking to you about what is the LCAP and what kind of feedback will you be providing to help the district set um, our actions and priorities for the coming school year. One of the components of the LCAP is to consider how our students are doing and taking a look at something called the California dashboard and being aware of those metrics as we talk about areas of need. The primary purpose of the LCAP is to make sure that our unduplicated students are being well served. So our students who are English learners, low income students, and foster youth students, and to make sure that we're serving all students to the best of our ability. So I have Chris Iser here. He's our Director of Instructional Technology, and he is going to review our most recent California school dashboard results so that you are aware of the full district picture, so that when we get to that conversation later this spring about identifying needs and prioritizing spending to meet those needs, that you will have this background knowledge. So thank you, Chris.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? All right, great. Mika, I'll just say next slide when we need a transition. So we're going to share a little bit with you today about our 2025 California School Dashboard. It's actually the 2024 results that are captured in what we're going to show today, but it's released in the 2025 school year. So you want to go to the next slide. And so you'll see when we go to the California School Dashboard site, our district has its own dashboard, and then all of our schools also have a dashboard. If you were to just navigate to the Cupertino Union School District, you would see this homepage, and at the top right, you would see a button to view all schools, which would allow you to go into each dashboard for each individual school. The California School Dashboard is published annually, and it is part of the California Accountability System. A school district or a school is given colors ratings for state and local indicators. On this screen here, you'll see that for us as a district, we receive ratings for academic areas like English language arts and mathematics. Additionally, English language learner progress falls under the academic indicator. We also receive indicators for chronic absenteeism and suspension rate. The areas below the colored boxes are our local indicators, and these are things that we fill out locally and share through the California School Dashboard process. You won't actually see these on the individual school dashboards, but you'll see that we continue to do well on the California School Dashboard with our English language arts, math, and English learner progress in the blue indicator, which is the highest indicator. And then the suspension rate and chronic absenteeism is in the green. And so on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how these colors are determined. So for each indicator, there's a 5x5 table, and it takes into consideration 2 data points. It takes into consideration the status or the performance level for the existing year, and then the change from the previous year. So in this example on this screen, this is for the English language arts indicator. Along the left-hand side, you'll see where the status for the existing year was for that particular category, and then any of the change across the top. And you basically play the game of Battleship, where you go left to right, and then top to bottom, and you find the color indicator. So you can see in the blue areas where we were in for language arts and math, we need to either score at the very high level and maintain or increase those in order to keep our blue categories. And then the green areas you can see as well. If you had curiosities about all of these 5x5 tables, these can be found by going to the CDE website and just searching for 5x5 tables. As I mentioned, there's one for language arts, math, suspension rate, chronic absenteeism, English learner progress, but that's how you get a colored dial for each of the indicators. So we're going to just quickly go through where as a district we scored on the next slide. For each of the indicators. For English language arts, math, and science, you'll see these little cards that represent our color, which is at the top, and then what our status was. That's the next line below the color, and then the change from the previous year. At the bottom is what they call the equity report, and that just breaks down the number of student groups that have fallen into other colored categories. So you'll see for English language arts, we maintained a high status of 86.1 points above standard. And we maintained that with very minimal change from the previous year. Similarly, in mathematics, we were at the blue level and we scored 100.3 points above standard and maintained 0.3 points from the previous year. In science, this is actually the first year where science is being reported on the California School Dashboard. And so there is no performance color given, but it gives you just basically our status of where we scored at in terms of points above standard. And so you might be wondering, well, what does it mean when we say points above standard or distance from standard? On the next slide is just a quick example of how that score is generated. The concept of distance from standard is based upon where each individual student scores in relationship to the scale score range for standard met. There are 4 different levels that a student could score in. A student can score at the not meeting standard, or standard nearly met, standard met, and standard exceeded. So the standard met is basically level 3. And where a student falls within their scale score range determines which of those 4 performance areas they score in. So in this example, standard met can be achieved by scoring anywhere between 2,528 and 2,578. So if a student scored exactly at 2,528, they would be 0 points either above or below standard. That is basically the start of being above or below standard. So if a student in this case scored at a 2505, they're actually 23 points below the lowest standard score or standard met score. So they're negative, that counts as negative 23 points. If a student scored at 2,538, they would be 10 points above. So the state of California takes every student's distance from standard, whether it's a negative 23 or a positive 10, every student in our district, and they average those together as a simple average. And that is how they determine the distance from standard. If you can go back to the previous slide, Nico. So when it says 86.1 points above standard, that's the average of every student's distance from standard score. So we have students who are probably scoring at 100 points above. We probably have students who are scoring below. But when they average every student's distance from standard score together, that's how they determine that score. So they do that for language arts and they do that for math. They will eventually do that for science as well. We can go to the next slide after the distance from standard. Thank you. So the next area is our English learner progress indicator. And this is determined by identifying the percentage of students who are making English learner students that grew one ELPI level. So in order for a student to score in this category, they must be an English learner. They must have taken what's called our LPAC test. You'll see as a district, we were in the blue area with 65.5% of our English learners moving up one ELPI level on the LPAC test. And that's representative of what we want for all of our English learners, that they're making annual progress as they attain English proficiency. Eventually, when they score high enough, they exit out of English learner status and they become redesignated fluent English speakers, and they no longer have to take this test. So the large card on the left-hand side represents all of our English learners. Within that is a subgroup of long-term English learners, and these are students who have been an English learner for more than 7 years. They're a targeted group that we pay attention to, because if they're not redesignating in those first few years, we start to identify maybe there are some other things that we need to do in order to support them. But this group, the long-term English learners, scored in the yellow with 65% making progress, which was a decline from the previous year and an area of opportunity for us to continue to focus on. Want to go to the next one, Nico? So the two, what they call conditions for learning indicators, are chronic absenteeism and suspension rate. So for our chronic absenteeism, you'll see that 6.7% of our students were chronically absent last year. And that is a decline of 1.2%. With chronic absenteeism and suspension rate, these are the two indicators we actually want to see go down in terms of the numbers. Because if you're declining in chronic absenteeism, that means more students are coming to school. And if you're declining in the suspension rate, that means less kids are being suspended. So a decline is good here. Chronic absenteeism is defined by the percentage of students that miss 10% of enrolled instructional days. So they have to have been in our district for at least 31 school days. And of the number of total days that they were in the district, if they miss 10% of those days, they are identified as chronically absent. And unlike truancy, chronic absenteeism takes into account both excused and unexcused absences. In terms of our suspension rate, you'll see that we had 0.7% of our students suspended at least one school day last year. And that is a 0.1% change. So they identify that as being maintained, not really an increase or a decrease as much as it's been a maintaining of a low suspension rate. And again, the way they identify a student who falls into this category is this is the percentage of individual students suspended at least one day. It's not the total number of suspensions. Basically, if a student is suspended one time or a student is suspended 3 times, they're counted the same. It's a one student suspension. So that is what you will see when you go to the California School Dashboard and you look up either Cupertino or you look up individual school sites. And that's how you read it. As a district, we continue to be very proud of maintaining high achievement in academics and also maintaining positive conditions for learning. One new thing that the state is released in draft form this year is the next slide, which is the growth model. So the growth model is another methodology of data that the state is looking to report out on the California School Dashboard. Unlike, Mika, is there a way that you can reduce the zoom on the screen so that we can see the whole slide? The zoom option. Oh yeah, one more time if you could. If you could just make it 100%. Thank you. So in the past, we have always looked at our English language arts and math data. And as we described before, it was comparing the students from the previous year to the students this year and the change between them. And oftentimes the argument is, well, that is an apples to oranges comparison. We oftentimes want to know how much are students actually growing, a matched cohort of students. So this is the state's first attempt at releasing a growth model, because you can be blue or green and look very good on the California School Dashboard, but if students came in really high and left really high, it doesn't really answer the question, did students grow? And so the state's opportunity this year is has just released the California Growth Model, which potentially will be represented in future dashboards with colors or some other accountability measure. Right now, this is not being used for accountability. This is just for information purposes at this point. If you want to go to the next slide, Nico. So just on the right-hand side of this slide is what I just described when we talked about distance from standard and how we get the colored dial on the California School Dashboard. The growth measure is different, and we wanted to just show you a quick comparison. So growth is the average of all students' amount of scale score growth compared to the typical amount of growth for the same group. And basically what it's trying to say is if a student, let's take the example here, a fourth grade student scored at a certain level in fourth grade, the state uses multiple years of data to determine what would be the typical amount of growth for that fourth grade student on the next test. Based upon that number, a student will then take the fifth grade test, and the state can determine whether or not that student made typical growth, less than typical growth, or more than typical growth based upon how they performed on the subsequent test. So the individual student methodology across the middle here kind of tries to explain that. If student A grew 10 scale score points between fourth and fifth grade, they would want to look at whether this is more than, less than, or equal to the amount of scale score growth of a typical student. So if a typical student grew 3 scale score points between fourth and fifth grade, but in this case, student A grew 10 scale score points, they are 7 points above the typical growth. When we see students who are making more than typical growth, that tells us that we are actually accelerating students beyond what is their typical expected growth. So what that looks like on the dashboard is an aggregate of scores based upon a simple average. They will take each individual student's growth compared to the typical growth, and they will aggregate that and then represent it as an average score on the growth measures. So if you want to go to the next slide, Miko. So in this case, in English language arts, the average amount average data for each of the English language arts and math growth areas, you'll see our students are 7 points above the typical growth of what they should be or expected, and that is considered above for that growth category. So that we celebrate that because we know that we're actually moving kids throughout the year. It's not that kids just come in high and stay high. We actually are moving them beyond what is considered the typical amount of growth. So you could call that acceleration, or you could call that growth beyond what's typical. In mathematics, it's even more significant. We see that our students are 31 points on average above the typical growth in mathematics, which also is well above the growth category. If you want to go to the next slide. What lives below the surface here is an opportunity for us as a district to really look into, well, on the average, if we just look at the all student group, we look really great. And that our students are exceeding what's considered typical growth. But the state will then break down student demographic groups. And this is where we start to identify opportunities. In language arts, we have 3 groups that are performing below typical growth measures. And in math, we have 1 group performing below typical growth measures. That really highlights for us an opportunity to dig in more behind the data and ask the question, why aren't our students, our homeless, Hispanic, and students with disabilities making at least typical growth in English language arts? And why aren't our Hispanic students making at least typical growth in math? And so we have our own local measures that we use, and we have an opportunity to really dig into this data and identify some strategies to support these students moving forward. What we also like to do is celebrate where we see areas above. And, you know, when we see our English learners who are making more than typical growth, above typical growth in language arts, or our economically disadvantaged groups, which are oftentimes identified as at-risk groups, that they are above, those are things to celebrate. And we want to see if there are things that we can learn from the strategies that we're using with those groups, because that could then apply to our groups that are performing below. Is there one more slide, Miko? No, that's it. So that's our California School Dashboard. And again, we continue to celebrate our successes, and we continue to identify the opportunities and areas that we can strategize around to support all students in our district.
Thank you, Chris. And parents, I know a lot of you participate in the site council or other similar groups at your school sites. And so you're probably taking a look at this as well in those meetings for your own school site. If anybody has a clarifying question for Chris before he heads out, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat and we can try to answer that right now. Okay, thank you, Chris, very much. Okay, and then our final topic for today is regarding a request for a new language acquisition program. And I wanted to give you some information about what is happening in the district and what our requirement is, and then see if anybody had any comments to share or any questions to ask about this. So one of the annual notices that we send to parents, one of the required notices from our State Department of Education, is this one here that's on the slide. So when parents at a school, parents of 30 pupils or more at a school, or 20 pupils or more in the same grade level at a school, request a new language acquisition program, the district is required to notify people and also conduct what's called a feasibility study. So recently we received some information from parents at Eaton as well as parents at Muir. asking for a new language acquisition program, an immersion program that focuses on simplified Chinese and English. And so we have been going through the process of notifying groups, holding meetings, collecting survey information, and beginning our feasibility study. You can go to the next slide. The requirement for the feasibility study is to identify costs and resources necessary. And it kind of gives you here on the slide the areas that are required, but the district, of course, can go beyond as well. But the things that we're required to take a look at in determining feasibility are listed here. Certificated teachers with appropriate authorizations is the first one. With immersion programs are when students have part of their day taught in English and part of the day taught in the target language. So in this case, it would be Chinese. The teachers who teach in immersion programs, they require something called a B-clad credential, so different credentialing. So that's what this is referring to. Of course, instructional materials in both languages, professional development to ensure a quality program, and then also opportunities for parent and community engagement. So I'm working as part of our executive cabinet to go through this feasibility study and develop a written report within 60 days. So our deadline for that report is March 25th. And we have been having meetings at the two school sites. We've sent out a survey, and I'm working with my counterparts on the executive cabinet to do that analysis. The people that are part of that team include our associate superintendent of HR, who's looking at the teacher credentialing aspect. We have our CBO, who's looking at costs and also facility space and needs in that realm. We also have our head of student assignment who's taking a look at enrollment and those kinds of impacts. So it's multifaceted, and we're going through the process of taking a look at all of these components, and then we will be producing a report for the community. Some of the questions that have come up that I wanted to just call out. There's been a lot of parent comments around the district budget, and are we taking that into consideration? And so I want to assure people, yes, of course, we're taking a look at, the impact of costs. That is one of the requirements, and we're certainly taking a look at the district budget as one component. What would the cost impacts be, and taking that into consideration. Also, there has been some concern raised by both staff and parents around the importance of the neighborhood school at Eaton. And so that is something that we've said in the in-person meetings, is that we're committed to maintaining Eaton as a neighborhood school, as well as all the rest of our neighborhood schools as well. This is not, we're not, planning to take that away. We want to maintain Eaton as a neighborhood school and make sure that students in that attendance area still have their neighborhood school. So we're conducting the feasibility study, and we will be producing this report, as I mentioned. We have surveyed families directly at Muir and Eaton as one of the components. And also I wanted to remind everybody that we do have annually, as part of our LCAP survey, we do have our parent survey out right now that closes the beginning of March. And one of the questions asks about new programs. So there's an open-ended response on that as well. If you haven't had a chance to fill out your school's parent survey, I know our principals everybody's trying to hit that minimum 30% response rate. So it would be great to have more input on all the things on that survey as well. So let's see, did we get to the last slide there? Yeah. Okay. So once we get to the conclusion of the feasibility study, if we say that it is an affirmative decision that we are going to implement a new program, then we're required to create and publish a timeline of actions. If we find that it is not possible or not feasible, we are required to provide a written explanation of the reasons why it cannot be provided, and may offer an alternate option. So today I just wanted to let everybody know that this conversation was happening. This group is one of the notice groups, so that's why we're bringing it to you, since you're an advisory group for the district, and wanted to make sure everybody understands that we're doing this because this is this is our it is a state requirement that when parents ask, we need to take a look at it and conduct that feasibility.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I can hear somebody talking. I don't know. We may want to check our mute. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Did anybody have any questions or comments to share about this topic? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. And I'll ask Sarah if she can help me with the hand raising if we have more than one or two. Or Miko, somebody can help me call on people.
You have Jin,
Jin,
you
you can
yourself.
Hi. Hi, Allison. Hi, everyone. I'm Qing Yang. I'm a parent at John Muir. I'm one of the leading advocating parents for this initiative of the Simplified Chinese Immersion Program. Actually, I have a lot of questions from my supporting parents for this initiative. I think one of the important ones that comes up repeatedly is how will the site selection be happening when we evaluate the feasibility of such a program, right? Would it be at either of the advocating school, John Muir or Eton, or will it be a new, will be established at another site? Because from what I learned, like John Muir is kind of, the infrastructure is pretty full. The classrooms are full. So I'd love to hear about when we evaluate the feasibility of this program, what site selection criteria will be used to determine the program location.
Right. So the requirement is that we analyze for those two sites. So we're planning on, taking a look at Eton and Muir, since those are the required sites. And our current thinking is to include a third option of another site not specified, just to analyze the possibility in the broader sense as well. It's going beyond the requirement, but we know that that's an interest that has been brought forward. So just trying to, do our best job on the feasibility study and take a solid look at this.
Allison, you have another question in the chat. Did you want me to read that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm getting an.
Oh, I see. I can see it, Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a question about the current CLIP program. So we do have a Mandarin immersion program now in the district that is at Muir, and then the kids move on to Miller. And the question is, how is adding simplified Chinese a new language acquisition program and not a modification of the current curriculum? So, right. So I think this is asking, why is this being considered a new language acquisition program? It's because it's different. It's different than what we're offering now. So the written component is different. And so, in working with our attorney, we determined that we do need to analyze it through this requirement. Yes. Did you have another question? Ken? I think I might be saying your name wrong. I'm sorry. No. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Allison, what is the extent of what's the extent of the requirement that the school have to fulfill in terms of a language requirement? So for example, Spanish, right? Like if 30 parents come together, request Spanish in CLIP, Is that required that the district had to respond by creating a new Spanish dual immersion program for the parents, or is it just how brings Spanish into the school?
We're required to analyze the feasibility of their request per the information on the slides. It doesn't mean that we have to implement it, but we have to determine the feasibility and then implement to the extent possible. So, and the way it is worded is not language specific, but each time a request comes forward, we would be required to do this analysis. That's the state requirement. If the state wants parents to know that, you know, they have the ability to make a request for a new program, and the district needs to respond. So it's not a requirement that we have to do it, but we do have to analyze the request and then, you know, meet all of the requirements here of the timelines and producing the written recommendation. The decision either is affirmative or it's not possible.
And Allison, what's the external possibilities? There's been new creative possibility or new program added to school, or like what's the range of possibility here so we understand as parents? You're on mute. Sorry.
I couldn't hear everything you were saying, but I think you were saying what are the options that are being considered? Right. Okay. So the first request is to have a program housed at Eaton. So we used to have this model when Meyerholtz was a neighborhood and an immersion school. Some of you may remember that. We had a neighborhood school that had a program on site. So the alternative school program was operating on the neighborhood site. So that's essentially the request. The first request is, you know, Eaton remains a neighborhood school, but we house an optional immersion program that kids would enroll in through the current process of the alternative schools request. So that would mean could be people outside of the Eaton area across the district. The second option that we plan to take a look at is that possible? Is that feasible in any other location that the district owns? You know, even though that wasn't part of the written request, it is something that parents have been asking through the process. And then the third option is within the current CLIP program, which currently emphasizes traditional Chinese through the elementary grades, is there an option to include simplified Chinese within the current immersion program in the elementary grades as part of the existing alternative immersion school that we have? So not a new site, but an adjustment of the current immersion program.
And would that be optional? Are you on mute?
My computer keeps muting me on its own somehow. Apologize for that. Yes, in all of these cases, either the current CLIP program is an optional alternative program that parents apply for their child to participate in, and the requested option to add a new program, the notion of that also is an optional program. This is not a request for a language class like we have music or PE, where it's just a small portion of the day. Immersion is a model where it starts out with typically, you know, 70 to 80 to 90% Chinese instruction for the full day in kindergarten, for example, and then gradually releases to about 50-50 by fifth grade each year, decreasing the Chinese and increasing the English. So those are the notions that we're taking a look at through the study.
There is an analysis. I was muting you because if the people are unmuted, get this echo.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry. But there is message there's question in the chat if you want to read it, and I'll mute myself.
I see some comments back and forth on here, but just I think the question is, why is this considered a new program? And our interpretation is that it is a request for a new program because it's different than what we're offering now, and um, that's why we're looking at all the options and going through the process. So it does not mean that we have prioritized this or determined that we need to do it, but we are committed to, doing a thorough job of this study and then seeing where it takes us.
I have another question, if you
if
don't
you
mind.
don't mind.
As I think I'm hearing a lot of my echo. If it's okay, is it better? I think it's getting better. I'd like to understand what's the overall process for the district to gathering parent input. I know that the survey has been sent out and there are some meetings that parents can attend. I guess throughout the whole parent input gathering process, is that all that's included? Or specifically, what components do you think that are most important for parents to provide as support and input? One aspect I can think about, for example, parent fundraising, that could be one of the important components for the district evaluation. But of course, this is my guess and take. I look forward to your guidance.
Yes, thank you. So the main lens that we are using per the requirement is costs and resources, right? So that's kind of that first threshold. Can the district afford to do this without impacting other areas of the district? And that's something that a lot of parents have raised already, wanting the district to take a strong look at that piece. So that's the requirement: costs and resources. We still want to know if parents are interested in this. That's an important component, but it isn't the lens of the feasibility study. So so far we have surveyed parents and held the meetings. We also are carefully watching that annual LCAP survey that I mentioned, which has gone to all parents. It asks a broader question, not do people want this immersion program, but it's a broader question around what new programs or enhancements should the district be considering more broadly, because that's important too. We have scarce resources. We want to be hearing from everybody in terms of what we should be prioritizing. So right now we're really focused on the costs and resources part of things, since that's the core requirement here. Some parents have asked us if we're going to send out a survey to the whole community specifically about this. And my response on that has been, we will consider it. We will determine if that's needed once we get further along in the process, first starting with costs and resources. I also have shared in some of the public meetings that, one thing to be aware of if you haven't been attending the board meetings is that the district is in a time of budget reductions. That is, we are in a time of scarce resources. So that is something just to be aware of. We do know that at many of our schools, including many of our alternative schools, parents make donations that support programs, and some staff funding is supported by parent donations. But in recent years, we have put a freeze on that because it is a liability for the district. When we look at our budget, we can't, build a budget on donations. We have to be certain. So I think that's important. While parent donations are so wonderful and valued and important, that's not a long-term plan for any program, because we have to have annual district funding to sustain things. It wouldn't be prudent for us to say that we could just rely upon generosity of parents, for the future. So that's just a general fact about the district, not specific to this program, but something I think is relevant. But we do ask on the site surveys, we have asked, how could parents support this, since that is one of the costs and resources components. And parents have been sharing lots of ideas about how they could volunteer to help a program like this, and sharing a lot of things that they could offer in that realm. So we really appreciate all of that feedback.
Thank you. Two follow-up questions to that. One is you mentioned that your district is considering sending a broader survey to district parents. I guess that includes families that have not currently enrolled in CUSD schools. Is that correct?
Well, we don't have contact information for parents who are not yet registered to come to the district, so we don't have a way to survey, parents that are incoming at this time.
Mhm.
Only
And-
those who are registered. We send the annual. What I meant by the broader surveys, we have that going now. It's the LCAP parent survey that you should have access to through your principal.
Gotcha. I understand that. And another thought I think the district might consider is that actually a big body of the beneficiaries of such a program would be families that chose private schools or preschool children that have not attended CUSD alternative programs or such as CLIP. And these families right now have no current official channel to express their needs. And I think with them willing to participate in such a program, it would actually, I don't know, perhaps help resolve some of the funding constraint. And you mentioned there could be, the board is seeing a budget reduction. I'd love to understand perhaps the root cause of that and how maybe this program can help address that.
So we have a board meeting coming up this week on Thursday. People can attend in person or virtually, and you can hear more about the budget reductions. One thing that I think has changed, and maybe not everybody is aware of it, is that we're in a new funding structure now. So more students does not mean more money for us. So that would actually not help. We used to be funded per student, but now we're funded in a property tax model. So more students is actually less per student now. So that's just, something to be aware of. So. Okay, and then there's some questions in the chat about, is this optional? Yes, all of these scenarios are optional alternative programs like we currently offer. Is there a request to adjust CLIP? Yes, that is one of the requests that we are analyzing. The request is, can we offer simplified Chinese in the elementary grades as part of CLIP? So I'm going to be meeting with the teachers and the parents and reviewing the survey data. I don't have too much information to share yet since we're going to be producing this study, but yes, that is one of the requests. And as I stated at the beginning of the meeting, I know a lot of people have joined. This is initiated with parent requests, and as a district, we're required by the state to follow this process that is illuminated on the slides, and that's what we're doing. So there's not too much to report other than that we're going through the process and we're seeing where this study leads us. Okay, I'm available. You can reach out to me if you think of something after the meeting that you want me to know, or if you have a question, you can always just email me directly. We don't have to just wait for the next meeting. So feel free to reach out. And also, if you are a parent at Muir, our meeting is coming up soon that we sent out. You can get that information from the principal if you aren't in the loop on the meetings coming up at Muir. And we also reached out to the Miller families because the students from the Miller CLIP families matriculate up to Miller. So wanted to get their perspective as well. So in closing, we are moving our way through, and look, our next meeting date is the date that our feasibility study is due. So we'll be able to share an update by the time of the next meeting. So that's convenient. I really appreciate everybody taking time to be a part of this and engage in this conversation that we're eagerly kind of working our way through all the components here, and we really look forward to everybody's partnership and participation as we see where this leads. So feel free to reach out to me with anything else that you might need or questions that you have. All right. Thank you so much.